Anthony, no floor plan.
No floor.
Okay.
I've got it here to give you after. Now, Wikipedia says that the earliest known recipe for Apfelstrudel was in 1696, and it's now famous throughout the world as a Viennese dish. Now, strudel apparently means pastry, and of course the apple speaks for itself. And the word, I'm told, describes comes from the German word for whirlpool. Now, Wikipedia also says that the centre of excellence for Apfelstrudel is the Imperial Bakery at the Schönbrunn, you can correct me on the pronunciation.
That's all right.
At the Schönbrunn Palace. But Wikipedia is not always right. What's not recorded is that actually Apfelstrudel originated in England. Didn't you know that?
How is this good?
Now, it happened that Prince Eugenie was giving a large family party at the Belvedere for one of his cousins. And in that year, he employed an English caterer by the name of Nigella, who was the daughter of the English Chancellor at the time, von Nigel von Lawson, a minor nobleman. However, the English...
Was German ancestry.
Really?
Yes.
Trust you to know that. Now, the English version was, as you can expect, as you would expect, rather crude. It was really Apfelkuchen rather than Apfelstrudel. So Eugenie had his team of pastry makers, of which he had 42. Refined the recipe. And his chefs came up with what we now know as Apfelstrudel. Well, the dish was a great success. And all the guests, there were 1,400 people at the party. Well, it's the Belvedere, you have to fill it somewhere.
That would be 600 horses.
Well, the 1,400 people went home and they instructed their own pastry chefs to come up with something, and they came up with an approximation of the Apfelstrudel, and the cake soon, all throughout Austria, became a great success. And in fact, Eugenie's chef, von Monsieur Paul, was feted amongst the nobility, and there was a subsequent painting which we saw today by Monet of the chef, known as and the chef. The painting was called De Koch. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
I must say this was misunderstood in England. And Apfelstrudel became very popular because they thought it was an aphrodisiac. The painter, you also saw this afternoon, Peter Strudel, became fixated on the cake.
Was he a flaky character?
Evidently. He painted still lifes of Apfelstrudel and became so fixated upon it that he ate it every day for breakfast. His friends, of course, nicknamed him Apfelstrudel. He ate it sprinkled with icing sugar, which is the way it's eaten now, but soon his teeth began to fall out, and he died, sadly, very sad. Don't laugh. He died in 1714, a broken man. He left his body to medicine, and when they took his body apart, they said he was rotten to the core. I thought that might appeal to you. Unfortunately, the popularity of Apfelstrudel led to a shortage of apples throughout the Austrian Empire for some 15 years. A period of no apples, which came to be known as the Apple 9 period. And there were, I unforeseen consequences because the popularity of the apple strudel meant that there was a large demand for apples. There weren't enough apples to go around. Prices of apples started to rise. Only the nobility could afford the apples. The lower classes couldn't afford the apples. So they ceased to be able to eat apples with the frequency to which they'd become used. But this turned out to be a great benefit to the doctors, because after all, an apple a day. So the doctors were kept very busy. But the Habsburgs did very well out of it, because, or very well out of it, because they had so much land and they planted apples throughout their estates. Needless to say, they planted Royal Gala apples. And the growers also then became very wealthy. But that's really the history of apple strudel. But I think it's important that we come to the, what's the word? The word, iconography of the apple strudel.
Yes.
You heard it here first.
Now, you've just got to think about this, because Jarl's been trying to teach us all week that the upper classes, the nobility, had to find a way of distinguishing themselves at all times from those lower down than them in the pecking order. Now, apple strudel could not be eaten off the gold plates. We heard from our guide earlier in the week that the metal would become tarnished, so it had to be served off ceramic plates. And this gave the opportunity to the nobility, because here was the secret: they could decorate their plates in such a way as to denote rank of the person eating and serving the apple strudel. So, the more decorated the plate, the more fluted the columns along the... don't laugh. It's very serious. It was important, and then the higher up the noble tree you became, the more decorated the heads of the columns were. The flutes at the bottom were filled in naturally with engravings or reliefs of apples. And then fruit was at the top. But there was a little twist to this tale, because there was another way in which the nobility distinguished themselves from the lower classes. If you were, the secret of a good apple strudel is, I think you'll agree, it has to be moist. It has to be really fresh. Now, if you were a nobleman and in the middle of the night you felt like some apple strudel, all you need to do was kick your pastry chef out of bed, and more apple strudel would be produced, so that was fine. The lower classes didn't have that luxury, so they had to eat it with, well, either cream or vanilla sauce. So if you look around you today, it doesn't apply after 1918, I don't think, because the whole thing, particularly within the Ringstrasse, changed. But if you look around in the cafes and restaurants of Vienna, you'll find that those people who eat it with vanilla sauce or even with cream are definitely lower down the social scale. So it brings me to the point of this story, which is to propose a toast to our host, Jarl.
Yes.
It's only my second Martin Randall. I do intend to go on others, but so far this is only my second. But I can't imagine that anybody on any Martin Randall trip could have a more charming host than Jarl. Urbane, charming, helpful. I really believe that if he asked the Red Sea to part, it would. And the defining characteristic, at least in my memory as I go home from this trip, will be that the fact how strongly he defies stereotype, because I think most of us have an image of the German character which is quite different from that of Jarl's, and a more delightful and dry sense of humour I've yet to come across. So my toast would be on.
Thank you.
Cheers.